thank you all for coming here today and braving this not so new COVID world. And thank you for GNAT for recording today's presentation and sharing it even more widely. So without further ado, I'll jump right into it. Today's talk, we're going to be covering wintering birds. These are the birds that choose to not migrate and to stay here in Vermont, specifically in this region. We're going to talk about the challenges and benefits to staying throughout the winter and their strategies that they've adapted over time to survive here in the cold winter climate. We're going to talk about some of the common resident birds, not all of them, but just a good handful to start off with throughout the talk as well. And we'll talk about how to enjoy, see these birds, how to support them, see them in your backyard, how to feed them. And then lastly, we'll just talk about some of the resources that you can employ to learn more about winter birds. So we do have a good number of birds that migrate out. We have on the order of 500 plus different species in North America that undergo some level of mid to long distance migration. Certainly, waterfowl are a pretty notable group that migrate. A lot of our raptors, our hawks, eagles and whatnot migrate. Some of them don't, some of them stay. And a lot of our really charismatic songbirds, especially like the warbler group, very diverse group of birds, they definitely migrate. They go very far. They go down to South America. And in fact, I dare say, if you want to learn more about migratory birds, we could revisit our migratory bird talk, which I gave here in the fall, and hopefully we'll give again in the future. But today, talking about birds that choose to stay, we'll start off with the black-capped chickadee. I'll reference the chickadee throughout today's talk a bit. One of my favorite birds, very small bird and very charismatic bird that, for its size, does pretty well to survive the winter here. And this contrasts with our state bird, the hermit thrush, that does migrate south. And so the chickadee stays, the hermit thrush leaves. Just to give us a bit of a kind of a cohort of like champion birds to talk about today. Some that I see a lot at our bird feeders that I kind of wanted to throw out there. We've got the downy woodpecker, which is a fairly small woodpecker. And then a little bit larger, but very similar in size, or similar in characteristics, is the hairy woodpecker. I know the difference, or I remember the difference in that the hairy woodpecker has a much longer bill than the downy woodpecker. And so I just think of like head, hair, and then bill long. So, hairy, downy woodpecker. Talked about the black-capped chickadee. The white-breasted nuthatch is another bird that we see a lot in our backyards. They really like suet. We'll talk about suet later. The ruffed grouse, which is also a game species, they sometimes will frequent feeders, and they can certainly be a bit of a surprise to stumble upon one in the woods when they kind of explode out of the snow. The tufted titmouse is another notable bird alongside the blue jay, one of the bigger ones, and then the American goldfinch. This bird is actually in its breeding plumage, so they don't look quite so yellow and gold right now, but a bit more drab. But you'll definitely recognize it just based off this photo. So this is just kind of like a representative group of backyard birds that choose to stay here in the wintertime that you'll likely see around us. Now, as a group of birds that choose to stay, there's more or less a common group of characteristics that define them. This isn't completely true, but in general, the males and females tend to have the same plumage, meaning that they look the same. The males and females, like the chickadee, for example, are identical. This isn't true for the chickadee, but they tend to have larger body sizes. So like the ruffed grouse, for example, is a pretty large bird. We'll talk about why some of these characteristics are true of resident birds. But beyond that, they tend to exist in a variety of different habitats, meaning a variety of different forest types, a variety of different environments overall. And they're also dietary generalists, so they eat a lot of different types of food, from seeds to insects and whatnot. And a lot of them also tend to nest in cavities, meaning that they occupy like sheltered space instead of have like a nest that is perched on a branch. So there are some advantages to staying, and this does come at a cost. But in general, they save energy by not migrating, right? So these birds don't have to fly, in extreme cases, thousands of miles to overwinter somewhere else. And so they save energy by staying here, although they use a lot of energy as well to stay. And generally it's safer than migrating, meaning they don't have to undergo this long distance perilous journey in order to overwinter somewhere else. And they can also, by staying, take advantage of changes in resources. And what I mean by that is that if, like the other day, where it got up to 60 degrees, no doubt there was, a bit more activity out in the woods. There's good opportunity for them to forage. But really, it's like a late fall and early spring that can help these birds do a better job, or take in more resources, being here to experience those changes in resources than the birds that are not here, and potentially dealing with much more challenging environments in their wintering grounds. And as I mentioned, it does come at a cost. And therefore, there's two main challenges that I'll talk about today to choosing to stay in their wintering ground as resident birds. And the first challenge is food. So, birds, they eat a variety of different organisms. Some of them eat, like I mentioned, are generalists. They eat a variety. Others are more specialized. The birds that stay here tend to be generalist. And so, basic food items for birds include insects, soft mass, so that's like berries, the woody buds of vegetation, trees, shrubs, and whatnot. They'll also eat, some of them eat like hard mass, like acorns and beech nuts. Others, like the bald eagle or an osprey, for example, are piscivorous, meaning they eat fish. Of course, that requires open water, right? And then other common food items for birds would include amphibians and worms, both of which are limited, if not non-existent, in the wintertime. And it's notable that birds need to consume a lot of food to survive in the wintertime. You can imagine that the energetic demands of staying warm in the winter is pretty great. And so, to kind of translate this into terms that us humans might relate to, a 160-pound human has to eat somewhere between 53 to 120 pounds of food a day to keep up with a bird relative to its size. And so that's just a tremendous amount of resource that these birds need to consume every day in order to stay alive. And so one of the strategies that birds employ to find food, gather the amount of food that they need, is they group up, right? So a lot of these birds, like the blue jay, the American goldfinch, the American robin, they all more or less group up in the wintertime. And the thought here is that, that safety in numbers, and also just, more eyes on the ground. You could think that one individual could find food, the rest could follow, and then in turn, just, with the more eyes looking out, they can find more together. And you'll often see them grouped up like this at the bird feeder. Another strategy that these birds employ is to store food and cache it. And here I really love to talk again about my friend the chickadee, the black-capped chickadee. So these little birds that weigh somewhere in the order of like 8, 9, 10 grams, very small, they actually store seeds throughout the summer, and they hide them all over their habitat, their territory, and they remember every little seed that they've stored in the crevices of trees, a lot of it's in crevices of trees, and apparently I read a report once that scientists have been able to kind of measure the fact that these birds somehow kind of wipe their memory clean after each year, so as to allow for more memories to be created. So basically they kind of like wipe that hard drive and they recreate a map of all their little hidey holes of seeds out in their home range to survive the winter. And I just think that's incredible. So again, we've got the white-breasted nuthatch here on the left, and a bit of a ragged chickadee on the right here. Again, talking about being a generalist with the rough grouse. These guys they'll eat even like little buds of plants, what trees and shrubs and whatnot. That's enough substance for them to survive. Others like the cedar waxwing here, and this is a bird that we see a lot of, usually in groups. We can hear they have like a really high-pitched song, and you hear them typically like kind of just flying over in these groups. You'll see them descend upon like a hawthorn bush, or if an elderberry bush has berries still, or some other type of fruit-bearing tree, and they'll just like pick it clean. So again, it's like safety in numbers, working together, but also like being able to kind of vary what they take in as food. Other birds will even take advantage of like the misfortune of others. They'll eat like carrion, meaning dead animals. These are high-calorie foods with a lot of fat that really go a long ways in helping these birds survive in the wintertime. So the second challenge to staying in the wintertime is to stay warm. And we ourselves, we have nice homes. These birds don't necessarily really have homes, and yet we can relate in that it can be really, really cold, wet, snow. We can have all kinds of different conditions all in one day. And the variability alone really poses a great challenge for these birds. Aside from needing to take in a lot of food in order to stay alive, these birds also have to stay a lot warmer than us in order to fly, really. That's just the nature of having, to obtain flight, you have to be able to use muscles, and those muscles use a lot of energy, and that requires a lot of heat. So staying warm is a major challenge to surviving the winter. And birds have a couple different adaptations here to help them survive. Their feathers are a big one. So they've got a protective layer of outer feathers that's like a shell, and these outer feathers, they preen, so they clean, and they also use I'll talk about this on the next slide, but they have a protectant that they put over an oil that they put throughout their plumage, so to speak, to protect it, waterproof it. And then below that, they've got down, right? So, and we all already relate to this fact because we as humans have taken advantage of down over the years ourselves, in the insulative capacity of down. And so between the outer feathers and the inner down, they have quite the protective shield against the weather, so to speak. And as I just mentioned, they do have this gland at the base of their tail that they kind of express and then use their beak to kind of spread that throughout their feathers as they preen to keep their coat good. To get even more technical, it's notable that these birds also have a special circulatory system that basically features, technical term is a countercurrent heat exchange system. Essentially, their cold feet, the cold blood in their feet, when it returns to the body, would cool the body down if they didn't have blood vessels next to it to warm it up. So they basically have they have it such that as the warm blood leaves the body, it heats the cold blood that's coming back so that the bird doesn't get overly cold because of its cold feet, which is really cool. And also, there's just not a lot of tissue in their feet, So it's really just, some blood vessels and musculature and ligature. So not too much to freeze off at all. They also employ the leg tuck. So just being able to kind of keep one foot inside in that downy layer and warm is important. And alternating their legs, they can go a long ways to stay warm. As I'd mentioned, a lot of these birds live in cavities. Either they make them themselves, like for example, the chickadee will excavate its own cavity in a tree and it will nest in there. Others, will just take advantage of holes created by, woodpeckers and whatnot. So like the barred owl, for example, which is one of our resident birds that stays here throughout the winter. You can see this one on the left. Being able to seek shelter in the storm is a big advantage over trying to weather that out in the elements. The ruffed grouse employs a pretty interesting strategy to weather the storm, so to speak, in that it'll bury itself down in the snow. And so it's not uncommon for folks like hiking out in the woods to report that suddenly they had the snow just exploded and this brown thing just flew out of the snow, and that would be a ruffed grouse. So they will just dive bomb down in the snow, and they'll spend the day or the evening in there to take advantage of. Snow is actually insulative in nature as well. So that's kind of a cool strategy. And then again, safety in numbers. So some birds will actually cuddle, so to speak. They'll either group up in a nest box, or like these tree swallows, on a branch. They just being together, they can share their warmth and kind of weather the storm together. So we talked about two of the challenges to staying here in the northern climates, getting enough food and staying warm. The next thing I wanted to talk about is how all of us can help these birds out in their trials trying to survive the winter. And a lot of this you can do right at home in terms of helping them out. So by promoting snags, these cavity trees, so to speak, that host birds both in the summertime, so birds can nest in them, but also seek shelter in the wintertime. That is a great habitat to have on your property. Of course, we're incentivized to remove dead trees that pose hazards to our houses and structures and whatnot. And I wouldn't advise against that. But just the thought of leaving a dead tree and realizing the value of that dead tree as more than just a dead thing or a dead tree is it's important. So that's habitat. From there, offering natural foods on your property, so planting native plants that bear both hard mass, so you think about, again, maybe you have acorns or beech nuts or some other type of nut-bearing tree, trying to promote that on your property either by planting it or through habitat stewardship, but also trying to avoid planting some of the sometimes attractive invasive plants. And so we do have, a variety of them around here. They're on my property, trying to get rid of them. They spread, true to the nature of, we call them invasive for a reason. They spread really easily, but they're actually kind of calorically, they're attractive in that the birds like to eat them, but eat their nuts and their berries, but the nutritional quality isn't as great as their native food. So things like Oriental bittersweet, it's beautiful, but it's not ideal for birds. Common barberry, bush honeysuckle, these are common invasive plants that are pretty widespread and ubiquitous on our properties, but we would benefit to our birds by replacing them with native plants. And then, of course, we can also put out bird food and supplement kind of the lack of natural foods, which do vary and do wane with the winter. And I'll talk about that in my next slide. But thinking about just putting bird feeders out and high-calorie food can really help your birds out a lot, as well as provide for an opportunity to see these birds right in your own backyard and report these birds to various entities to contribute your observations to science. So some of the high-energy foods that these birds benefit from, they all have high fat content, right? So fat is what these birds need this time of year. And some ideas to kind of get the juices flowing in your brain is, so suet, like beef fat, which you can get at a butcher or get that in a grocery store. That's a food source that almost any bird would eat. Also, you think about putting out maybe peanuts or peanut butter. My stepfather, growing up, he had like for the nuthatches and the hairy and downy woodpeckers and the titmice, pretty much all the birds, he put up like a piece of wood that had, you know, kind of holes drilled into it that he smeared peanut butter inside. And that's just a great opportunity for them to kind of like, you know, grab onto that and then pick out that peanut butter from those holes. We'll talk about feeder design in a moment as well and expand upon that, but that's one simple thing that we did growing up that really helped the birds out. Niger thistle seed is another high, you know, there's a lot of fat in there and it's pretty attractive to birds. Sunflower seeds, millet, cracked corn, even dried fruits, including raisins and cranberries, and you can soften it with water. All of this is just a natural supplement to what they otherwise would find or hope to find out in nature. And also, it's notable to avoid feeding bread. They'll eat it, but it really doesn't offer much substantive nutrition or energy, so it kind of is just like a filler. So there's a variety of different bird feeders that kind of serve a variety of different birds. So depending upon the type of bird that you have in your backyard, you might think about getting a certain type of feeder to cater to that bird. And there's a tremendous amount of information online at feederwatch.org, which is a Cornell Lab of Ornithology website. And it's also paired with a great citizen science project that encourages people enables people to offer their observations, their sightings of birds at their feeders to science. So it's a great resource to learn about how to attract birds to your backyard, but also how to offer your observations to science. Beyond that, just some quick tips on placing these feeders out, or maintaining these feeders rather, is just to be aware of the hazards that windows can pose for birds, meaning that if you put these feeders too close to your windows, the birds might accidentally fly into the window. And so thinking about putting those feeders greater than 3 feet from your window can really decrease the likelihood of birds getting hit or hitting the window. I'll also mention that you can put like stickers on your windows or some kind of visual cue that there's a barrier there, just to make it seem that it's not like some kind of clear, you know, basically you want them to be able to see the window. It's also notable that you want to clean your bird feeders frequently, just because, you know, the seed gets wet, gets moldy. There's also, you know, plenty of bird droppings that build up. All of that can spread bird disease. It can you know, the mold isn't bad, is bad and not good for the birds. So we suggest cleaning the bird feeders out every 2 to 4 weeks, which is actually pretty intense maintenance, but it's important to help the birds out in this way. And then also beware of avian predators. You know, certain you know, birds of prey will definitely can key in on your feeders. And if you see a bird of prey kind of hanging out and picking off your birds, you could think about bringing your bird feeder in for a while, just to kind of let that other bird move on to another spot. Cal had asked me to talk a bit about cleaning your feeder, because I've mentioned feeders before. You know, most basic way is just kind of to try to take like, you know, what do you call that? Like a trowel or a putty knife, and just scrape out the, you know, the gunk. And then also you can scrub it with some dish soap and water, warm water. You know, ideally, in a perfect world, you could run it through you could disassemble it and put it through your dishwasher, but you also want to be wary of salmonella and other diseases you know, the stuff you're trying to clean out. You don't want to necessarily bring that into your house. But you could also spray it with just a mild bleach solution to disinfect your feeder as well. And I dare say any effort to try to maintain your feeder is just better than not. So I just want to put that plug out there. There are handouts. There's 20 of them, which should be enough for everybody in this room. But there's handouts that describe some pretty simple treats you can make for your birds. And so these are just 2 of 3 recipes that I've got on hand for you that just describe these cool little, you know, pine cone treats and the suet cakes that you can make for your birds. I dare say it'd probably make a good gift or a good, you know, project for a child or a student project or something like that. So you just think about putting these out for your birds. I won't leave this on probably too long, because, like I said, I've got the handout for you all to take home. And if anybody has any questions as well, I'll just have you email me, and I can also send you the information, the recipe. So as I mentioned, there's this, when it comes to also helping the birds out, all of us can participate as citizen scientists, meaning, you know, we can be observers. We can count birds and offer those counts to science. And there's a variety of different entities out there, or really a variety of different projects by a handful of entities facilitating such citizen science work. And one of them I wanted to note, talking about feeders, is feederwatch.org, which is part of this is the repository for the Project FeederWatch information. So if you go to feederwatch.org, you can learn about how to become a citizen scientist and have your own feeder, a part of the scientific community, so to speak. There's also, Ruth is going to talk about this at the end, but she reminded me right before the talk that in February there's the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is another opportunity to, as the name describes, just count birds in your own backyard, even at your own feeder. And we are also in the midst of the great Christmas bird count, and it's 122nd year, which is pretty amazing. It's the longest running citizen science effort in existence. It basically was born from the idea that instead of hunting birds on Christmas Day and counting how many birds we harvested, we should count how many live birds we encounter. And so this is just, it's been done every year for 122 years. And effectively what it is it's an effort to survey birds within a set geographic area. And we've got coordinators that adopt these unit areas. One of them is in our room right here, Ruth, who then kind of shepherd people in the effort to count birds between, here it's December 14th and January 5th. So it's a window of time around Christmas in which people just go out and they cover the same routes, ideally every year, and it gives a really good comparison year to year of trends in birds over time. So yeah, it's basically, all there is to say from here is if you just go to audubon.org, you look up the Christmas bird count, you can learn all about it, and there's an interactive map where you can look up your local coordinator and then contact that individual, and they'll set you up with how you can participate. So some of the resources that I use today that I think are really notable, that could teach you almost everything that you might want to know right now about birds and conservation and bird science. Audubon, obviously, eBird.org. I didn't really talk too much about eBird, but eBird is another citizen science tool whereby you can just basically go birding and offer your observations during from your birding excursion to this online database. And it's a widely popular tool, and it's the observation, the data gathered in there is used every day by scientists to do some pretty amazing conservation work. So it's a great resource. It's also a great resource in that eBird.org. If you go there, you can actually look at what people have seen in terms of birds and where around you. So if you're interested in like learning where you might go to see a whole lot of birds or a certain type of bird, you can totally go on this website and search your area to find out where people have been seeing birds. So it's pretty cool. Another Cornell Lab of Ornithology website, allaboutbirds.org. It's what the website says. It's literally allaboutbirds.org. All about birds. Feeder Watch, I talked about that, and bird feeders. Our own Fish and Wildlife Department has some information, some guidance on bird feeders, especially around bears. We do need to think about bears and the fact that bears, while they're hibernating now, when they're out of hibernation, basically mid-spring to mid-fall, bird feeders can be an attractive nuisance for them. And then lastly, when it comes to physical books and digital guides, Sibley, Peterson, Nat Geo, these are all really good resources to pick up if you're interested in learning more about birds. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that we're up on the mountain if you ever want to come up to Mercer Forest and do some birding on your own. And we have an eBird hotspot going right now with, I think we're well over 130-something species that have been documented on the property. 30 miles of trails, 9 overnight cabins, 3,200 acres of land to explore. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time and attention and the opportunity to be here. And I would probably turn the floor over to Ruth and then take any questions that you might have.
Hi, I'm Rosa Stewart. In this area, there never has been an organization like Audubon that formed to be a sort of a clearinghouse for information. And then the Vermont Bird Store came in, and Randy Schmidt did a fabulous job of promoting birds in this area and organizing walks and things. And he was sort of the go-to person for all things birds. And that store is now left, but there still is a solid core of birders in the area, and those of us that are part of that have been involved in many citizen science projects. Tim mentioned the Christmas bird count. I coordinate the Christmas bird count, which is in Winhall. These count circles were established by somebody who wanted to contribute to science years and years ago, and the Winhall circle is 50-some years old. And it's in the center, it is in just a little bit north of Lowell Lake, if you know where that is, and it's a 15-mile diameter circle. And during that count, that Christmas count period, a coordinator will choose one day where everybody counts, and it's just that one day. There is room for counts birds that you may see 3 days before and 3 days after, but the key is the one day. And we did ours on Saturday, and I know several other Vermont Circle coordinators also did it on Saturday. And it's important what you see as well as what you don't see. And we all thought that it was going to be a phenomenal day because the storm was coming, and we figured the birds would be in there feeding at the feeders, etc. And it turned out to be surprisingly quiet. We were running across feeders that were totally full, with seeds and no birds at all. One of my feeder counters, who has been active for many counts, said she had none at her feeders. So we don't know. However, there was a bald eagle reported to those that participated. So that's one long-time citizen science project that is invaluable for providing information for research, etc. And the Christmas bird, or the Great Backyard Bird Count is, I think it's February 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. And there is great information on the website for, if you just Google Great Backyard Bird Count, it'll give you information about it and the protocol for counting. And if anyone's interested, I can just speak briefly to the protocol for counting at your feeder. At the end of the day, you report the amount of time, approximately, that you spend watching. And it could be all day in little spurts and counts. In other words, you're just sort of monitoring your feeders as you go along. So in the morning, you may see 5 chickadees, and maybe at 4 o'clock you see 2 chickadees. Well, did you see 6 chickadees or 7 chickadees? Generally speaking, you just report the maximum number you see at any one observation time. Sometimes with chickadees, you can watch for maybe 10 minutes, and you may see a flock of 3 come in from this side, and maybe 4 from that side, and then they all disappear. And then all of a sudden you may see some come from another side. So you just have to kind of guess how many individuals you think are coming. And you say, well, how do you prevent yourself from counting double? And my theory is, for every one you counted, you probably missed 2. Especially with chickadees, it's very hard because they don't come and sit. So I encourage you to participate in that. That's a 4-day count, so you can count every single day, and you can submit your data for every single day, or 1 day, and it doesn't have to be your feeder. You can go to the local pond, you can go to the local whatever, any birds that are reported. So the other thing I wanted to really emphasize, and Tim taught on this and touched on this very lightly, is eBird. eBird is an international database developed by Cornell, and it has become the most powerful resource for information on birding worldwide. It's a website, and they have a webpage, but it's an app that you use for your phone to enter your sightings when you're in the field. And so you're going along. Those of us that have been birding forever and ever, we're pencil and paper people. And so some of us still do that, and we get home and then we put our sightings in on eBird. But eBird not only will give you an exact location, if you are in the field, it will track where you go. So it'll give you the distance that you travel, the time that you've done, and it would be specific to a particular site. So if you can use your eBird at your house, I would suggest you practice right there at your house. Just put in the birds that you see. If you're on a trip and you're in Timbuktu on Monday, and you're in Kalamazoo on Tuesday, all of those reports can be collated into a total trip report at the end of your activity. The app itself has a lot of information for using it, eBird information for using it. So if you're not using it now, you don't have to use it every day, you don't have to use it every time you see a bird, but consider this, that every single sighting that goes into that eBird is accessible to the world. And from a research point of view, it's invaluable. So they're using it now to determine, are we losing populations? Are there fewer birds being seen in certain areas? What birds are now here in the Northeast that we're seeing? And they we weren't seeing them, 10, 15 years ago. So go to that webpage and educate yourself.
It's a free app.
It is a free app, absolutely. And I would certainly be willing to talk anybody through using it or encourage you to use it. Martha?
Yeah, I just want to say that eBird and the Great Backyard Count, it's an international endeavor. So you can be in Florida or Costa Rica or South America or France, wherever, and you can still do the Great Backyard Count, and you can still report all of your sightings on the ebird.org. So it's not just specific to our region at all. International, worldwide.
And that's true about the Great Backyard Bird Count. It used to be, can't even remember how we submitted our data before eBird, but if you do the Great Backyard Bird Count, your data is submitted through eBird. So you do have to establish an account for yourself, and you then enter your birds in that. And it's listed in taxonomical order, and it's you can put pictures in, you can put sound recordings in it now. It's interesting because as long as I've been birding it, everybody has been tallying birds. Well, I should say that. When we first started birding, we just reported one, we saw one bird. We saw this species, we saw that species. eBird changed everything. Now they want you to put in the numbers that you saw. In other words, you just see 2 cardinals rather than 1 or whatever. So that has changed. And then now you see people out there with cameras and everything, and it's become, I don't care whether I see the bird, I've got to get a photograph of it. So now all these people are out there taking pictures and putting them on eBird and sound recordings. And all of that information is just blossomed, and it all goes into this one database that is invaluable. So,
Ruth,
Cal.
if someone was interested in starting, is it the Christmas bird count? You represent Winghall. Do you need a volunteer for like Manchester area?
Setting up a count circle is a fairly scientific process, and Tim, I believe, is thinking about it. Each one of the 15-mile square, circles, diameter circles requires people to count the whole circle. So I have people that are driving routes, and mostly it's people that are watching feeders. So it takes a core of people to do one of these counts. And there's the Bennington, there's a count in Bennington, there's a count in Rutland, but there are counts all around the state. So the best thing to do is to find one that's near you and volunteer to participate. So if any of you live in Winghall, Londonderry, Jamaica, Weston, any of those, Bromley, Stratton, I would love to have you join the Christmas Bird Count. Any other questions? Okay.
All right.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ruth.
Okay.
That was great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all. This is,
Oh, by the way,
yeah.
I've been making those suet cakes for a long, long time, and I cut the bottoms out of cottage cheese containers, and that will fit inside the suet holders. So I cut them off. I put 2 of them back to back in the suet holders with the peanut butter and mixed, and that's what I use in the summertime.
Ah, that's a good hack. Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out today, and this is the first time I've stood up in front of a group of people in 2 years. So this is awesome.